Remember our telephone numbers to have contact with us: 2236-4080, 2236-4080. The New York Times wrote a tragedy on Urmia Lake in South Azerbaijan, reminding the world Iran's government and the people on an environment massacre leading genocide in the area. The essay has chosen with some changes from New York Times. Its greatest lake shriveled, Iran confronts crisis for water supply. Urmia Lake, South Azerbaijan. After driving for 15 minutes over the bottom of what was once South Azerbaijan's largest lake, a local environmental official stepped out of his truck, pushed his hands dipped into the pockets, and silently wandered into the great dry plain, as if searching for water he knew he would never find. Just an hour earlier, on a cold winter day, here is western Iran, South Azerbaijan, the official Hamid Ranagadr. He recalled how, as recently as a decade ago, cruise ships filled with tourists plied the lake's water in search for flocks of migrating flamingos. Now the ships are rustling in the mud, and the flamingos fly over the remains of the lake on their way to more hospitable locals. According to figures compiled by the local environmental office, only 5% of the water remains. Iran is facing a water shortage potentially so serious that officials are making contagious plans for rationing in Tehran area, home to 22 million, and other major cities around the country. President Hassan Rouhani has identified water as a national security issue, and in public speeches in areas struck hardest by the shortage, he is promising to bring the water back, a shrinking lake. Experts cite climate change, wasteful irrigation practices, and the depletion of groundwater supplies as leading factors in the growing water shortage. In case of Urmia Lake, they add the completion of a series of dams that choked off a majority supply of fresh water flowing from the mountains that tower on either side of the lake. Only some years ago the water here was 30 feet deep, Mr. Ranagadr said, kicking up dust with each step on the dry lake bed. In the distance, spots of land, once islands where tourists would spend vacations in bungalows overlooking the blue waters, were surrounded by plains of brown mud and sand. We just emptied it out, he said with a sigh, stepping back into the car. So-called Iran's water troubles extend far beyond Urmia Lake, which as a salt lake was never fit for drinking or agricultural use. Other lakes and major rivers have also been drying up, leading to disputes over water rights, demonstrations, and even riots. Major rivers near Isfahan in central Iran and Ahvaz near the Arabian Gulf have gone dry, as has Hamon Lake in the Afghanistan border region. Dust from the dry riverbeds has added to already dangerously high air pollution levels in South Azerbaijan and the neighborhood countries, home to 4 of the 10 most polluted regions in the world, the United Nations says. But nowhere is the crisis more pronounced than at Urmia Lake, once one of the largest salt lake in the world, at 90 miles long and roughly 35 miles wide, is It was slightly larger than Great Salt Lake in Utah. Environmentalists are warning the dried salt could poison valuable agricultural lands surrounding the lake and make life miserable for millions of people who live in South Azerbaijan. Along what used to be a lakeshore boulevard, worn down snack bars and dressing rooms are testament to the days when people from across South Azerbaijan and Iran and the neighborhood countries would come to water ski on the lake or cover themselves in its black mud, which is said to have healing powers. About 2 decades ago, a local village, Mukhtar Chiraghi, began to notice the water line receding. First 100 meters, then 200 meters. After a while, we couldn't see the shoreline anymore, he said, standing in what was once his thriving cafe, Chiraghi's Beach. We kept waiting for the water to return, but it never did. Most people in the area blame that half-dozen major dams the government has built in the region for the lake's disappearance. The dams have greatly reduced the flow of water in the 11 rivers that feed into the lake. As an arid country with numerous lofty mountain chains, Iran has a predilection for dams that extends to the region of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Dam construction was given renewed emphasis under President Rouhani's predecessor as president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who, as an engineer, had a weakness for grand projects. Another driving force is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which, through its engineering arm, Khatamul Anbiya Construction, builds many of the dams in so-called Iran and surrounding countries. Half an hour drive into the mountains above the city of Urmia in South Azerbaijan stands the mighty Chai Dam, collecting water that would otherwise have reached the lake. The dam finished during Mr. Ahmadinejad's first term now holds a huge lake itself. Some of Urmia's water is here, said Mr. Ranagat, raising his voice over the howling winds that blow down from the surrounding snow-capped peaks. The people here need water too, is what they say. Besides producing badly needed electricity, the dams are intended to address the water shortage, but too often the water is wasted through inefficient irrigation techniques, particularly spraying, Mr. Ranagat and other experts say. In recent decades, the amount of land dedicated to agriculture in the region, the country's heartland, has tripled, with many farmers growing particularly thirsty crops like grapes and sugar beets, Mr. Ranagat pointed out. His department has calculated that about 90% of all the water that should end up in the lake is sprayed on fields. In a 2005 book that he wrote on national security challenges for so-called Iran, President Rouhani estimated that 92% of Iran's water is used for agriculture, compared with 80% in United States and 90% in some Western states. They turn open the tap, flood the land, without understanding that in our climate most of the water evaporate the way, said Ali Reza Sayed Qureshi, a member of the local Water Management Council. We need to educate the farmers and the government. The lake has also been attacked from the underground. As a part of the government's policy, large land holdings were divided into smaller plots and most of the new owners promptly dug new wells, soaking up much of the groundwater. There are around 30,000 legally dug wells and an equal amount of illegal wells, Mr. Sayed Qureshi said. As the water is becoming less, they have to dig deeper and deeper. Climate change, particularly rising temperatures, has played a role. Average temperatures around Urmia Lake have risen by a little over 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the past decades, official statistics show. A long drought in the region seems to have ended 2 years ago, with rainfall levels returning to normal, but the increased rainfall has not made up for the other factors that are draining the lake. We are all to blame, Mr. Ranagadr said. There are just too many people nowadays, and nobody needs to use the water and the electricity the dams generate, but with what price? Back in his office, the Department of Environment officials sounded like soldiers on a doomed mission. They had drawn up no fewer than 19 plans to save the lake, ranging from the sensible education farmers in new irrigation technologies or the fanciful seeding clouds to increase rainfall. We can start now, said Abbas Hassanpour, the head of the office. Flanked by his assistants, including Mr. Ranagadr, he said his department had created task forces and models ready to implement. While Iran is shooting monkeys into space to advance its missile program, the Rouhani's government's low on funds because of the impact of the international sanctions against Iran's nuclear program has not made any money available for efforts to restore the lake. Even if it did, officials say it is probably too late to save Urmia Lake. All the money in the world can be poured into the lake, one said, but in the most optimistic projections it would take decades for the water to reach its old levels, assuming it even could. There are simply too many problems, too many competing interests for the rescue to be feasible. Not doing anything or not enough will still create many problems. In 2010 and 2011, violent protests over the lake erupted in Urmia, South Azerbaijan, and security forces had to be flown into the restore order. We are not allowed to speak of the lake, said Mortaza Mirzai, who lives in Urmia, but they built their dams, and now everything is gone. Others said ordinary people are also to blame, but the government is the steward of the country, said Mushin Rad, who sells printers equipment. They are responsible. Mr. Ranagat, who grew up around the lake, said he spends free time battling poachers in the hills around it. You know what the real problem is, he said. Everybody across the world is thinking of money. We did too, and now our lake is gone. That was all. Thank you for listening to us. You were hearing us from from Azerbaijan, from the Voice of Azerbaijan. Remember our telephone numbers again to have contact with us, 22364080. We continue with Azerbaijani music.